Hey guys, so we're up to part 3 of the social studies unit, and this is the battles of the American Revolution, our victories and our losses. So, the American colonists actually didn't start off doing too great, to be very honest with you. We were actually really losing the war for a very long time. And remember how we had spoken about George Washington and he was a very important figure? Well, he becomes the leader of our side of the war. George Washington takes over and he becomes the military front, and he gets all these men together and we make this ragtag army. And as we had said before in the past videos, the army was not doing too good. We were not trained to fight, and that really showed up and was very evident when we started the war with Britain. It was very clear that we may not win this, and that was concerning to a lot of people. So Bunker Hill was one of the earlier battles. Bunker Hill was a very, I would like to say, a very bloody battle, which does not put it nicely. A lot of people were killed during the Bunker Hill battle. It essentially let the colonists know that the British were really a force to be reckoned with. That meant that the British were out and ready to win this war. They were well trained and they were ready to fight, whereas we were not so ready. We were kind of underestimating them. We didn't think that they could be as powerful as they were. And then you have the crossing of the Delaware. This was another thing that did not go as planned. Just like they had planned to win at Bunker Hill, they had kind of planned the crossing of the Delaware a little differently. And what you can see here is the picture of George Washington, who's the man standing. We have our flag in the background. It seems to be this beautiful day that they're pushing out across the Delaware River, and they're going to attack the British, but this is actually not at all how this went. This is actually the complete opposite. So essentially, George Washington decided for this battle that he was going to surprise the British. He knew that if they went head on with them and the British were prepared, that they would lose. And that's how every single battle, just like Bunker Hill, was going. They were losing a lot, and they were losing a lot of people. So Washington decided if we couldn't win fair and square, we could win by cheating a little bit. And we're going to jump in the middle of the night, we're going to cross the Delaware River, and we're going to surprise them when they least expect it, when all their men are sleeping. Originally, he wanted to go at dusk. He wanted to go just as the sun was setting. Oh, I'm sorry. I think he wanted to go at dusk. Sorry, I was confused. I confused myself. So he wanted to go just at sunset. His army wasn't ready, though. Again, they were not trained. They were not military officers. Most of them were farmers, so they kind of took their time. And by the time they got here, it was 3 hours later than sunset. They got to the river, and it was like 9 o'clock at night already. So already George Washington was concerned, and his right hand for this operation over here suggested that they just don't do it at all. He said maybe we're better off just staying back and letting the men rest. And George Washington said, we're not doing that. We put way too much into this operation, this surprise attack, and if we don't do it now, we'll never be able to do it. So what they did was cross the river, but unlike what's shown here, you see this bright sunny day, it was actually freezing cold. The river was almost completely frozen, so they were hacking through ice in order to get across. And it was snowing so hard, in fact, that you could barely see in front of your face. So essentially, by the time George Washington, who is right here, by the time his army made it to the other side, they were pretty much frozen to death. They were so cold they could barely move, and they also had to get all their weapons and all the cannons and all of their stuff all the way to the other side of this river. So it took them hours, and by the time they got to the other side, rather than it being in the middle of the night, it was actually 5 a.m. However, it's winter time, so 5 a.m., it's still dark, and the other army, the British army, was not prepared. They were actually still asleep, and very few men were guarding their camp. Because of this, even though it kind of didn't go as planned, they actually still won. It was a huge victory, and these surprise attacks, he learned, are really the way to go, because Britain was very prepared for the war, but they were not prepared for the surprise attacks that America was willing to do to win. Now, another one is Valley Forge, and this picture right here is actually Valley Forge National Park. So you can go and visit this with your families. This is a little too far for us to visit as a class, but you can go bike riding. There's all sorts of sites. You can see the little log cabins in the background. You can see the types of cannons that they use. So this is actually a really cool site that still exists. Valley Forge was almost a train wreck. It was almost the thing that kind of cost us the war. So during Valley Forge, it was brutally cold. It was absurdly cold. It was the dead of winter, and unlike the British who had the money from the king, we did not have any money. So we were not getting new uniforms. We were not getting food. We were not getting shelter. The men were freezing to death. And in fact, there are articles and letters from the men that said that their shoes were completely worn through and they were walking on the frozen floor and they were leaving bloody footprints all the way wherever they walked. That's how cold they were. Men were dying. 2,000 men died just of the cold, not from war, but just from being so cold and so hungry that they couldn't live anymore. And a lot of men actually wound up deserting, and that means that they signed up for the army, they pledged that they would be in the army, and they actually left. And that was mostly because they could not take how cold it really was there. But that's where Lafayette comes in. And we had said Lafayette was a man who was French. He was only 19 years old. He was a pretty cool guy. And he jumped in and said, don't worry, these guys are like a ragtag disaster group, and they don't know how to fight, but I can train them. And he does. He comes with his own French military and trains the other officers who go from this mess to becoming an actual American army. And Valley Forge, even though it was a disaster and even though people died, was kind of a win for us because we wound up going from a bunch of people who were farmers and merchants and didn't know how to fight but really had the drive to win to a bunch of people who were suddenly trained by this military leader and now could actually hold their own in a battle. Then you have the Battle of Saratoga. This was the turning point. So here's essentially what happened. The British took over New York, and remember we had said if they took New York, we were going to lose, and they took New York. And that's when the leader, the General George Washington, said to himself, oh no, we are in trouble. He in fact said, since they're going to have New York, burn it to the ground. He wanted to burn every single building in New York, every structure, every tree, burn it straight to the ground so that they couldn't, the British army could not use whatever they found. Luckily, a bunch of people talked him out of that. They said that that was a little bit ridiculous and that maybe they should not do that. And then they said, but what if we launch Saratoga? Now, this was actually not just a battle, it was a group of battles. And the reason it was a turning point was because somehow we won. And it was mostly that the French jumped in and gave us food and money and they were really helping us. But somehow something happened. They don't really know what the deal was, if it was just the French or if all of a sudden the army suddenly had this will to win that was stronger than before. But we won. We started to win these battles, and the wins kind of made people want to fight more. They made us want to win the war. And you might be asking, why did the French bother to jump in and give us all this food and money and weapons and uniforms? It was because they also did not like England. In fact, a bunch of countries did not like England because they were all kind of fighting for the same thing. They wanted the land. So the French, because the British kind of took the land from them, because they were originally also around Canada and the United States, they had also made colonies, they were kind of mad at Britain also. So they were very happy to help us to win this war. And here's the final battle we're going to talk about, and this is the huge battle that you really need to know about, the Battle of Yorktown. So now that the French and the Americans are working together, we took one last victory from the British. And you can see George Washington here. He's on his horse, and he is accepting from this man who is British. You can tell because he's got a lobster coat on, or a red coat. He is accepting this sword, it looks like. It was actually them surrendering. This is him accepting the surrender, the official surrender from Britain. So basically, we forced the British to surrender in a way that was not what you usually typically see. So in the Battle of Yorktown, what Hamilton and Washington, because remember we said Hamilton was a big contender in this, he was a big person in this because he also led some of the military. He was Washington's right-hand man. Now, the reason we won is because we dug trenches. Trenches are like little holes in the ground where you live in the ground. You live in this little burrow and you wait until it's quiet and then you jump out and you dig another trench and you try and get closer and closer and closer to your goal, which is like a fort or maybe it's their cannons. We dug these trenches, we used cannons, and then we stopped using guns for the last piece of the battle. We actually started to use something called bayonets. That is essentially a gun, but with a sword on the end. So instead of filling the gun with the bullets like we usually would, we actually took all of those bullets out. Why? Because back in the day, when they first started making these weapons, they were really easy to set off. So all you had to do was move the wrong way, and all of a sudden you would accidentally fire a bullet, and everyone would know you were coming. They would say, "Oh my gosh, there come the Americans," and they would all start firing. If we took out those bullets, nobody could fire any by accident, so they would be completely silent as they ran up to surprise the British. So Hamilton and Washington both decided that that was a good idea. And rather than fighting the way the British were fighting, we ran up onto the fort that they were at, and we just used the bayonets, just the swords. And that's what forced the British to surrender at the Battle of Yorktown. And Evacuation Day. Evacuation Day is actually really important. Evacuation Day is probably the most important day in the United States. Evacuation, think about if we're sitting in the school and we're told to evacuate. What happens? We all leave. We're evacuating. Evacuation Day is the same thing, except it's just for the British. We are asking them to leave America. You have lost this war and it is time for you to go. This was the day that we officially, quote unquote, won the war. So a fun fact is we used to celebrate Evacuation Day, and I know for a fact that you guys know that we don't anymore because you don't hear about it. We used to celebrate it in the same way that we celebrated the 4th of July. We used to do fireworks. We used to have like barbecues, kind of. They didn't really do barbecues, but it was something similar. We used to have like these feasts and we would gather and we'd party. But later on, we kind of made friends with Britain again. We wound up becoming their allies because of a couple of wars and a couple of things that happened later on in our history. That, you know, we settled our differences and we said, okay, we can be friends again. So we actually stopped celebrating it out of respect because we figured if we're celebrating the fact that we don't have any English people in our country anymore, then how can we be friends with the British people? It doesn't make any sense. So right here, you can actually see in this picture, we're tossing the British flag down, we're putting up our own flag. That's the original flag, had the 13 stars and the stripes. And here's Washington giving a hello to all the people in the square, letting them know that we have officially won the war. So again, we don't celebrate Evacuation Day, just the 4th of July. Now, what you guys are going to do is I'm going to post, because we're done. We're moving on to part 4. We're going to learn about the president, new traditions, the Constitution, checks and balances. So what we're actually going to do now is you're going to watch a brain pop video, which I am going to post. And hopefully it'll work. It works on my computer. It'll either be a brain pop, or if I can find another one, I'll put that one up. But it'll kind of explain a little more on the American Revolution, and then we're moving on to what happens afterwards. Now that we're independent, now what? We've never been independent from anyone before. So I'll let you know what assignment you have to do. You'll see it on the Google Doc, or the Google Classroom. Thanks, guys.